Europe currently is around 5 to 7 sort of years behind the US, or approximately where that they were in around 2012, 2013, when we saw states like Washington and Colorado legalize and things start to merge. So that was kind of the impetus that got us curious, and we started to think, is this the case in Europe, and how can we actually prove that rather than just making a big kind of claim?
Time for European cannabis to make some righteous moves? As head of analysis at Hanway Associates, Lily Temperton is a leading light on the international cannabis circuit. Fresh from publishing the consultancy's recent Recreational Europe report, she gives us some key insights into where the cannabis sector's heading this side of the pond. So, welcome Lily Temperton. Nice to see you. How are things? Great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks, Dave. Doing really well, thanks. And pleasure to be here today.
Now, you're kind of, I don't know, it's almost like you and Hanway Associates are kind of the OG of kind of like European cannabis kind of information. So just tell me a little bit about your work there and what you're doing, and about your own job and the kind of broader perspective of what you're doing at Hanway, because it's pretty amazing stuff.
Of course, thank you. So I am the head of analysis at Hanway Associates, which is our advisory and our kind of consultancy arm. So we work quite closely with clients, either clients that are in the cannabis industry and are looking to grow their business, either through consultancy, regulatory support, they're looking to merge with another company, they're looking to evaluate a new market, or whether that's things such as finding new partners, finding the answers to some kind of complex questions, or bringing together a lot of different issues that are often involved when operating in these new markets. So our mission has always kind of been to mainstream the cannabis sector and to help it grow and to help companies to become great. And I think that's something that we've really prided ourselves on doing over the past few years. So I've been working with Hanway for 3 years now, since 2018. I have been working in the consultancy team, so leading on a lot of the advisory work, and alongside writing the reports for First Wednesdays. So within the broader kind of Hanway company, we've got a few different businesses which we use, which do complement each other, and enable us to do as much as we can really in the space. So we also have our publishing arm, First Wednesdays, which is Europe's biggest network of cannabis entrepreneurs and investors. But it's not only those groups, it's also, we have regulators turning up, we have brands coming and listening, we have all sorts. We tend to be as open as we can with the network. And obviously COVID hit, and we couldn't do, we used to do a lot of monthly meetups. We had to put that to an end, which was really sad. And we found that we had a lot of great stuff that we wanted to share with the community still, and we still had a lot of the same ideas and stuff that we were really keen to get across. So we decided to do industry reports. And one kind of issue that we've seen with industry reports before is they're often really expensive, some of them up to $1,000 per time, which small startups and companies and individuals, academics, they can't actually afford. So we've always wanted to do our reports free to access, unlike the consultancy, which is more of a private service. But our reports, we've always wanted them to be free. So the reason that we've been able to do that is through partnering with companies who have very kindly sponsored the production of the report. So coming towards the report that we've recently reduced, the Recreational Europe, that one we were able to do because of partnering with Cure Relief, with Can Sativa, and with INTS, who is a UK law firm. So been doing these great reports. We did two previously to this one. We did one with the Danish Ministry of Foreign Affairs about the medical scene in Europe. And we did one with the data platform Crunchbase about the investment and the deals landscape. So that's a bit of a whistle stop of
it's great. It's great. And boy, I mean, when you talk about, the report, I mean, wow, to sort of, it's a beast of a report, the Recreational Europe one, and it's fascinating. It's 100, it's really well put together, not just in terms of the editorial, but in terms of the design. And it's kind of like everything you'd want to know. It's almost like the sort of definitive guide, I'd almost say, for, a finger on the pulse. So, tell us about, it must have taken you a good few months to put together. And what was your role? You wrote most of it, didn't you, yourself?
Yeah, of course. So, I was the lead author on the
all
report.
104 pages.
I can't claim that I wrote the whole thing. My amazing colleagues did also help, but
No, for sure.
I did lead on the production of the report. And to give you a bit of a sense of the journey of the report from start to finish, it takes around 5 months for a big report like this from the lead time until we're able to get it launched for people. So it involves a lot of at first kind of coming up with some hypotheses about what we expected to see. And in this case, it was that we think that Europe currently is around 5 to 7 sort of years behind the US, or approximately where that they were in around 2012, 2013, when we saw states like Washington and Colorado legalize and things start to merge. So that was kind of the impetus that got us curious. And we started to think, is this the case in Europe? And how can we actually prove that rather than just making a big kind of claim? So we decided to look into this really properly and found the backing and the sponsors to do it that found it also important to do the report. And then we set out to interview as many people as we could. And really great that you acknowledge that it's not just kind of the content, the design. We spoke to as many different types of people as we can, from brands to regulators, members of the parliamentary bodies. We spoke to health and safety and addiction experts. We spoke to activists, as many different people as we could.
As well as Big Nasty as well.
As well as Big Nasty, yeah.
I felt like just kind of looking at the list of people who are sort of quoted in the report, you've got, it just is a real reflection of the cannabis industry itself. It's, it's everyone from corporate lawyers to kind of, it's a real mixture. And I think that's one of the things that I really like about the sector, is that it's so diverse, and it feels like everyone who's involved is kind of building the kind of sector that they want to see, a diverse one, not just in terms of the different types of people, but the different value they bring to the sector. And I think that's really clear from that as well.
Of course, yeah. And I think something that was really interesting was that people had different conflicting views across who we interviewed, but there wasn't anyone that kind of trivialized the issue or saw it as a joke topic, or anyone that kind of, that everyone was very on board, and that even if they didn't think that a fully regulated model where everyone can just buy freely, some people didn't think that was the answer, but they still had really good points to say and really good insights, which we hope that the report's allowed to share. Because one thing that we like to do is to really give credit and to quote and to give direct spots for people that are actually involved in the US and these markets to contribute and to get their voices across in the report. So yeah, that was quite a big part of it. And then of course, quite a lot of desk research as well. I made a point of reading quite a lot of the other texts that have been put out by groups like Transform, Release, EMCDDA, all sort of bodies that have spoken on this issue before, so we're not kind of overlapping on other people's work. We really wanted this to be a fresh piece of work. And yeah, wrote it up. So it did take a few months. And then the design, of course, takes quite a lot of time for a report like this. And I think that's really where working so closely with the designer, and credit to my colleague Georgia for that, but working so closely with the designer to get the intricacies of cannabis across in the design. And some funny sort of anecdotes from this were the designer didn't know what hash looked like, or what a bong looked like, or vape carts didn't look right, or the nugs looked too clean. So there was a lot of us kind of inputting on making sure this was accurate from a consumer's point of view as well, as just from a kind of academic point of view.
It's like every opportunity, it feels like, I still feel like this, every kind of interaction you have with people involved in the sector is always an education. You always learn something new, whether you're kind of, it's incidental, or you learn something by osmosis, or whether you're actively trying to find stuff, which is, again, really interesting. But let me ask you about the report. What really surprised you most, I guess? Sorry, I'm kind of putting you on the spot a little bit. But what kind of surprised you most about it when kind of conducting the research? What made you go, oh, I never really thought about that? Or was it kind of, you feel like you had enough of a command that nothing really surprised you anymore regarding attitudes in the sector?
Yeah, no, I definitely wouldn't say that. I think there were quite a lot of things that were surprising in the report. But I think probably the biggest surprises maybe came out of the polling that we did. So I don't think I've explained the polling yet, so I'll give a bit of an overview of it, and then maybe what was so surprising from it. But we realised that there hasn't been a big poll across Europe about whether people support recreational legalisation that uses the same questions in each market. And that's been on a basis where we can compare across different countries. So we wanted to start the European legalization tracker and really hopefully start this year after year and be able to track the levels of support in different markets, and not just for whether they support legalization, but what models that they also support. So really happy to have been able to run that polling, and the headline figure came back that 55% of Europeans are in support for legal and regulated cannabis sales to over 18. So very happy about that. I think that was a slight surprise that it wasn't slightly higher, but if you consider that that figure doesn't also include the 18% that weren't in support or oppose, not too shocking, because that is then a big majority that either don't mind or are in favour. But what was the most surprising was that only the Netherlands didn't express majority support. So they were the only one that was below 50%.
Really?
And they were also, I believe, the most reluctant to have a cannabis shop in their neighbourhood or to consider trying legal cannabis. So that was really shocking to us. And at first we thought, well, the Netherlands is the big hub, and they've had since the 70s, they've had this, they've pioneered the seed bank. So that was a big shock for us. But trying to think about why, we've got a few theories. We have a feeling that potentially it could be that the overspill from tourism and from issues with the coffee shop being still serviced from illicit suppliers, those sort of things may have made people hesitant or think that reform.
I think that's one of the biggest stigmas, isn't it, about the Netherlands market? People think that it's completely legal, but that isn't the case, is it? Do you know what the actual it's decriminalized, isn't it, to a point, as you rightly said?
The situation is they've got a formal tolerance policy in the Netherlands, which they've had since the 1970s. And that enabled them to establish the coffee shops where the sale is permitted, and the use within the coffee shops and within the guidelines is permitted, but it's not technically legal. And the supply is still what they call the backdoor problem. So the situation there is that the supply under the current system is still coming from wherever the coffee shops are buying it from. It's not regulated, it's not tested, it doesn't have set levels of THC like you would find in, say, a dispensary overseas. So that's how the situation's been. But we are quite pleased to see that they have got intentions to change this. They launched the Coffee Shop Controlled Experiment program. So that's designed to shift a select portion of the coffee shops over to licensed suppliers. So the process of that, they did a big tender, they awarded 10 slots. The companies are still getting up and off the ground. So they will be moving to legal supply, but only a small percentage of the coffee shops at the minute. And in terms of broader support for reform, I think partly a lot of this is slowed down because there's not such an urgency as we have in, say, the UK or in Germany or in even France, where we don't have any sort of access. There's still at least some form of access, and many people think maybe we don't want to rock the boat with what we've got. But I think that's an area where I think the Netherlands will probably be one of the last to fully legalized.
That's interesting.
From what I've seen. And that's not something I initially would have thought.
No, not at all. But again, it just goes to show the, reading between the lines. It's easy to make, But again, you mentioned Germany, and I know that that's going to be a huge, I hadn't realized that quite the magnitude of, it's 83 million people. And I had a quick look earlier. We were talking about something like, 58% say they'd support a legal market. I think that's across Europe anyway. But thinking about Germany for a minute, or again, other markets in Europe, Switzerland, Malta, Spain, and things like that. Do you think when Germany kind of opens up, to the recreational market specifically, and I think, again, it's about putting the framework in place. Do you think that will create that kind of domino effect across Europe? Do you think we need a big country, I suppose, like Germany, to kind of do it properly before everybody else kind of follows? Or do you feel like it's a kind of combination of factors from other countries, kind of these different legalization or decriminalization efforts that will kind of push the rest of the continent in Europe towards recreational?
For sure. I think Germany is quite a special one. I think it's a huge economy, and it's got the biggest, largest medical market in Europe at the minute. So it is strongly associated with cannabis in Europe and being the driver. So I think for sure that will have a huge impact. And I think specifically about Germany, what's interesting is among the countries that we've seen put models in so far, the only ones that have actually passed through in legislation have been kind of non-commercial and non-profit models. So in Spain, like the social clubs, Malta has passed the first formal legalization, and that was non-profit. Luxembourg originally wanted to do commercial grow and supply, but due to issues with international treaties and neighboring countries, they reverted that back to home grow. So Germany really would be the first, according to the plans that the government has said so far, it would be the first fully commercial and kind of licensed and regulated with retail stores and licensed supply. So from that perspective, I think Germany has a huge part to play in renegotiating how we deal with cannabis at European level and an international level. And especially when considering like a lot of the people I've spoke to in Germany and even some of the more state level people are quite keen on exploring the international supply and import and export process, which at the moment isn't possible under treaties, the UN drug control treaties, that is. The US and Canada still haven't solved that. So this really would be a first of its kind if a kind of trade, an intercontinental trade was possible, and if Europe and Germany started that off. So yeah, I think it really is a proof of concept type thing. And I think once Germany can do it safely and fears about, say, driving and youth access are a bit calmer and people can see the results in Europe, yeah, I do believe others will follow.
Excellent. I mean, again, I was looking at the report. I think it's in the kind of summary. The idea, I think, Asda puts forward the idea legalization is a tool, not an end goal, and it's kind of like, doing it properly, in a way that it's tolerable for those who both love cannabis and for those who don't. And it's like building it properly, whether that comes through, it's destigmatizing it, not just saying, okay, click your fingers, it's legal, yay, everyone go out and enjoy. It's got to be couched within the sort of culture and within the right sort of legal framework as well. So again, that doesn't happen overnight, does it? It's a sort of slow crawl towards greater tolerance and acceptance.
Yeah, of course. And I think along that, there's got to be kind of tolerance from both sides. There's got to be people in the industry often would not overlook, but they don't want to necessarily be talking about some of the potential risks. And I think people will then use that as an opportunity to carry on the stigma and to act as if the industry is quite irresponsible, which is sometimes a view that you do see when people are talking about legal recreational. But then from the other side, there also needs to be tolerance for things like the scent of cannabis or your neighbors using it, or the potential of home grow, which a lot of people are opposed to, even if they would never use cannabis themselves. So I think we've got to all have a compromise, and people don't want to be some people don't want to be in a society where there is cannabis sold freely on every street, but others and truly shouldn't be living in a society where they can't get it at all. So we do need some sort of in the middle. But I think a huge barrier at the minute, in my opinion, is the media, and is particularly in the UK over other countries, I would say. The fact that every time there's any kind of post about any sort of change, like Sadiq Khan's diversion scheme, for example, or even things like the CAN card, or even things like the 420, there's always quite a negative slant taken by some parts of the media, and particularly calling out specific people that have made a change. And I think as a whole, that's really made quite a hostile environment for these topics.
I know what you mean. I think there was a bit of a backlash, I think, over the really unfortunate incident recently when someone in East London took a gummy and it was made from synthetic cannabis. And I believe was it The Guardian or what? I think, I can't remember which particular media outlet it was, just sort of saying, cannabis leads to death, and it was almost kind of demonizing the entire sector, the entire plant, and not providing the full context of the fact that this was kind of illicitly sourced kind of, the person probably didn't know what they were buying or had any indication of the levels of what they were consuming, which again, that just highlights the need for greater transparency and, you know, some form of decriminalization. But again, conversely, that the way it was reported, I know there was a lot of backlash against that, which again is that the kind of thing you sort of say media are kind of, it's not so much demonizing, but it's just not telling the full story. And do you think that happens quite a lot?
100%. And I think that story really resonated with me. I found it absolutely devastating because I think the girl's the same age as me, and I just found it really upsetting hearing about that. But for sure, everything you said about needing regulation and about things being demonized, and I think that the way that things get conflated and presented in the headlines, it's often deliberately wrong in some cases, or that's how I often see it to be. They often will use terms and jokes and stuff that's nothing to do with the topic, or whenever they would post a photo, it's not going to be of a safe legal product, it's going to be of a huge joint, or it's going to be of some sketchy packaging, or the associations that they use are often quite negative. And I feel like the lack of differentiation between topics like medical cannabis, between CBD derived hemp products, between illicit gummies made from THC and from the plant, and then stuff that's been sprayed or been contaminated. All of these things are often just mixed up in headlines, and a lot of people just don't actually know what is and isn't permitted, or what we can and can't do here. And I think that's caused a lot of problems. I even hear a lot of people saying CBD flower is legal in the UK, which it's actually not. But all of these sort of conflations and what's legal in practice and reality, I think have caused blurring issues.
It's kind of like that sort of Delta 8 situation I keep hearing about in the US. Like some states, like, well, technically it's not illegal, but we should probably make it illegal. Or, you know, there's so much. I mean, I think all of which you're saying is, you know, there's a case for education across the spectrum, really, isn't it? Not just for consumers or businesses, but for, you know, for GPs, for doctors, for healthcare professionals, for the media. And where does that come from? I mean, obviously it comes from, you know, reports like the kind of one you've put out there, but where else is that kind of coming from that you've seen? And who else is kind of sort of influencing that broader discussion? Yeah,
I think there's a few things that have quite helped and I think are making a bit of a difference. I think the big companies coming in and talking about this is actually helping, in my opinion. Seeing big mainstream groups coming in and support, and even putting out, even just saying that we would consider exploring this when legal and things like that, are really big in terms of changing perceptions. I think people view companies and brands as quite a big thing of what's right. And I think that as a steer is quite interesting when you see big companies now using cannabis to market their, even brands like Pepsi and Lush are all now using cannabis to attract consumers, because they can see that, and even in the public eye, it's now a good thing. So I think you don't want to trust them fully for education, but I think they've got quite a strong channel to be able to do that.
Yeah, and I think there's maybe a need to kind of for them to be consciously more informed about it. But again, it's like you can go down to Lloyd's Pharmacy and see like CBD patches and things like you're starting to see it a lot more kind of incidentally, and it's in a lot more people's consciousness. And I speak to people who have no knowledge of the section. It's like, that's the CBD, that's the good bit of the plant or whatever, or the non, and they see that there's a medical benefit to it. So again, it's almost kind of like that sort of message is starting to get through just through, you know, products being more and more available. But again, there's still a bigger kind of education piece, particularly around, I mean, I'm still staggered over the sort of numbers of the kind of UK medical cannabis and things like that. And, you know, how few people are so aware of it, really. And I think it's kind of like, well, so many people could benefit from it, for everything from kind of anxiety to kind of pain relief to, you know, PTSD. And it's like, how do we continue to do that? When I was speaking to James Smith from 4C Labs a few weeks ago, his kind of conclusion was that it needs to come from, you know, political parties, from, you know, to actually influence, then it has to come from these kind of organizations like the Cannabis Industry Council and things like that. They are the ones who are, because if we just kind of put the message out there, it's not going to be heard in the right way. I mean, what's your kind of insight into how those sort of things are working? If indeed you have insight,
sure.
I'm just presuming you know everything because you seem to.
Yeah, I think that the role of governments and regulatory bodies, I think, is really big, and I think also in just conveying that things are available. I think a huge amount of people don't know medical cannabis is legal, and part of that's because it's been kind of done through step-by-step reforms, getting it through the private clinics firstly, then scaling up to telemedicine and stuff during COVID. It's all been kind of gradual steps rather than a huge, big announcement that it's coming through the NHS or through both private and NHS. There hasn't been any kind of state announcement to that extent that I'm aware of.
Is it coming through the NHS?
So it is available in the NHS, but there's currently only about 5 patients that are accessing it through the NHS. So I believe it's for very severe epilepsy and for multiple sclerosis. I think a lot more people in the NHS are being prescribed the pharmaceutical products, so like Sativex, Epidiolex, but in terms of the unlicensed flour and oils and cartridges and stuff, that's I think it's about 97% private, if not more.
Yes, no, I thought that was the case, and it is. Yeah, no, absolutely. But do you think? I mean, do you think there'll come a time when you can buy flour through the NHS or be prescribed it? Or again, I can't remember what I was reading, something to do with it might have even been from the report. There's a kind of more of a culture in countries like Germany for kind of more alternative therapies, to say that in inverted commas, people being prescribed spa weekends and things for stress. So I don't know if it seems less of a leap to kind of have a doctor who would prescribe something like that to go, okay, we'll try this strain for anxiety or something like that.
Yeah,
but it still feels a long way from that being like, go and pay your £9 down at the chemist for
for sure.
10 grams of
I think personally I would love to see it on the NHS, and I think that should be the end goal. I think it should be treated the same as other medicines, and I think if that is the best thing for your condition, you should be able to get it without having to go to specialists and other channels. So I do definitely believe that it should. The case of how much that it actually will, I do think that we will see more products in the NHS, and I do think that, and at least initially, it may be likely to be the products that are more targeted for specific conditions, or they're more of a tailored product, more on the slightly pharmaceutical range. I do think that some of the more kind of soft medical conditions, things like sleep, headaches, back pains, and things like that, I think we'll hopefully see an increase of that through, people being able to access those sort of products through the growth of more non-medical channels. So I don't expect the NHS to be prescribing it for those things. I think they'll keep it for very strict conditions. But what I do hope is that as the wellness market grows, the recreational market grows, that everyone can access it for these medical conditions within their own kind of personal safety and use. So I think we'll get a bit of a split approach. I think we'll have more of a separation in the years ahead between kind of the consumer CBD products, the wellness, the recreational, and the kind of quasi-medical, and then the pure medical, which will probably be a bit more of the specialized products with kind of backed evidence, because that's what the NHS is really calling for, kind of this very hard to come by and expensive evidence, which fair enough that they're asking for it, because that's what's needed to get new products on the NHS. But for products like flour, where it's quite hard to do these kind of consistencies and checks, I think it is going to be quite a long process, unfortunately.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that, if medical cannabis, whether it's in the UK or wherever, becomes more prevalent, do you think that will lead to greater tolerance for a recreational market here?
It's an interesting question, because it's one that I've heard to be argued both sides. I've heard people use medical to say it's the door to recreational, but I've also heard people say it as medical may prevent further recreational stuff happening, because the medical patients who are sometimes seen as the ones who need it have got access. So I do think that it will help for sure. I think one of the things that I found really interesting was when speaking to some lawyers in Portugal, they actually said that the fact that Portugal has had medical cannabis production and the facilities, and people in the public are used to kind of seeing on the news new facilities open, Tilray's brought so many jobs to Portugal, or those sort of announcements, and seeing the products being shipped out and stuff. from what I heard, that's made the public a lot more on board with legal cannabis and on board with cannabis factories and facilities and stuff, and regulators more comfortable. And I think that's something we're starting to see. I think Germany may not be making this big step if they hadn't already got years as the Europe's biggest cannabis market in medical and had the experience for that. So I think, yeah, for sure, I think medical has got a really important role here. And I think we need to be thankful for everything that the medical sector's done on the journey to wider cannabis acceptance as well.
And in a similar way, I mean, thinking about how the US, or North America, I should say, really compares to Europe. I mean, actually, I don't know why I was surprised. The idea that, well, we have, 530 million people in Europe, which makes it an even bigger market than North America, than US and Canada and potentially Mexico combined, I guess, which is really interesting. But I guess at the same time, when you've got I guess it's similar in the US, the idea you doing things state by state. Similarly, in Europe, it'll be kind of country by country. Do you feel like there is overt sort of parallels between what can we learn from how the US went from medical to recreational and still on that journey? What do you think we're seeing a direct reflection of that in Europe, or do you think it's shaking out differently this side of the Atlantic?
I think that there's both. I think it's definitely going to be different here, and I think we've seen it being different here in the medical sector so far, with taking a different model, trying to put it through our normal medical systems, using quality standards like GMP. So it's a lot more kind of a strict and pharmaceutical process on the medical, and I do think that's going to happen as well on the recreational side. I think we will still have more of a stricter approach, and the polling that we did backed that up. A lot of people were in favor of things like the plain packaging, limits on THC content and things like that. So I think naturally we are a bit more skeptical, and I think that will be reflected in the models, as we've kind of seen a bit so far. We haven't seen any country go really wild and have huge advertising and mad cannabis products out yet. So I don't think we'll see that straight away. But in terms of what we can learn, I think there's loads we can learn from what America and Canada has done, both wrong and right. So on what we can learn from what they've done wrong, I would say the taxation, the fact that in California and Canada, about half of sales are still through the illicit market, simply because taxation on the production and on the consumers is just really high. So those sort of taxes and producers being unable to make a profit and to survive, facilities having to close down, has been a really big blocker. And hopefully we don't see tax as the number one factor and put a crazily high taxation, because to be able to tax the industry, it has to exist in the first place. And I think that's something that has been rushed into too much in some of our states.
No, I mean, that's interesting itself. I mean, the more I read about, I think something reported talking about, should we tax the higher THC potency? I mean, does that seem, I always think does that seem crazy? I don't know. For me, I understand why that was kind of like higher alcohol content. I was just trying to transpose it with that kind of thing. But again, it's an interesting kind of play, isn't it? It's like, how do you we're sort of pulling strings from different sectors and sort of putting them into this new sector, which is cannabis, and saying, well, it's a bit like alcohol, so we'll treat it a bit like that, even though it's completely different in many ways. But
yeah, for sure. I think there's been a lot of parallels drawn from alcohol and people trying to bring in the alcohol sector to do this. And I think it hasn't always worked. I'm speaking to some people in California, and they said that in the early days, when they needed kind of big cannabis warehouses and distribution, they were using like just the old alcohol ones, because they thought, it would just be the same. But of course, it's completely different. Like bottles need to be stored in a different way to flour, in a different way to frozen things. And so it's completely different. And I think there's stuff we can learn from these other industries, like things, for example, like I think what I would prefer to see rather than THC kind of taxes or potency caps is more of a THC units type of a situation where, like we've got with alcohol, you could say a vape's 2 units, a joint is 1 unit, an edible is 0.5. And that way, consumers that don't know anything are not going to be taking crazily high things.
But is it difficult to do that? Because again, again, I hear what you're saying.
Yeah,
it's that whole thing about. I mean, I looked into kind of like, if I consume cannabis, when is it safe to drive? What's the right limit? Because I know in my own mind, if I have something and I'm not in a fit state to drive, I would but technically, does that put me over the limit or under it? What's the limit? But and again, if you do a test, it's still in 6 months, you could still be potentially prosecuted. It doesn't work in the same way as alcohol, and I think that's again requires further exploration as I understand it. I think
100%, yeah. And I think the same with things like tobacco and with vaping and stuff. There are things we can learn. We've managed to adopt and adapt some cool things like the heat not burn tech from tobacco, which has now been used in cannabis probably a lot quicker than if we'd have started it from scratch. So there are things we can learn from these industries, but I definitely don't think the right answer is just to bring in the same models and the same executives, because that's been another issue of the States, and where they've brought in the sort of corporate figures who don't actually know about the plant, they don't actually know how to grow it, and that's also caused quite a lot of issues. So I think absolutely you need to merge both sides.
You have this, is why I guess you have this kind of unique mix. I mean, again, at the kind of launch event, again, it was almost kind of evident for the cannabis report that you guys put together. I mean, you had people who were, very corporate lawyers from INTS, and they were great. And, and then we had people like myself who were just kind of, in sort of communications, who were just kind of keen to find out more and talk to people. And it was a really interesting mix. But again, I guess when you talk about, bringing people from other markets and other kind of industries, when it comes to cannabis, the expertise lies in the illicit market, right? From people who've been growing it for however many years, technically illegally. And it's, they're the ones who know the most about it. And pairing those people with, I guess, corporate CEOs is just, well, again, it makes for interesting conversations, I should imagine.
Yeah, 100%. And I think what I've been really pleased to see recently is states like New York coming out and saying the first 100 to 200 licenses will go to people with cannabis-related criminal records. Alongside, I've seen other states where they are actively recruiting like previous dealers to be delivery drivers for on-demand services. So these sort of things I think are great. These are people who know how to deal with consumers. They know the industry, they know the product. And I think everything that we can do to bring these people in is a good thing, in my opinion. And I think these sort of social justice schemes and anything in that sort of realm, I think we should absolutely be talking about more and be prioritizing, because we've seen that the industry can't exist without legacy players and without the expertise and the value and the role of genetics and the role of brands and the role of consumers and community. These are all things that exist already. It's not like we're building the whole thing from scratch. And I think it would be wrong for us to build it all from scratch, because, for example, taking the example of the Netherlands in the new legal pilot that I mentioned earlier, they've had to find, obviously, their genetics for that pilot, but a lot of the best genetics have been in the illicit market. So a lot of people are now working to bring those genetics into the legal system, because that's what consumers will want to buy in the coffee shops. They're going to want the same strains that they've been having, and not maybe a strain which was available legally, but it was more meant for medical consumers. So all sort of interesting things like that, which will need people to work together with experts in genetics, experts in retail. But I think it's absolutely possible,
And I think it's not just a kind of play to kind of, pardon people who were, non-violent criminals, for want of a better term. It's about actually there's something we can learn from people who have been involved in the industry. And I think, again, that's, mutually beneficial in many different ways. But
of course,
it's interesting. It's very interesting. What was I going to say? So, I mean, in terms of, if we come back to Europe for a moment and think, okay, so which countries are, almost kind of, I don't know if the answer is Germany, but which countries are kind of doing, in your opinion, kind of the move towards recreational, properly? Do you feel like we can take the examples here in Europe of what's happened in North America and sort of say, okay, we've learned what's right, what's wrong, and then apply that here with that kind of knowledge? Or is anyone really doing it? You've thought, actually, this country's doing it really right, or this country's doing it really wrong? Do you think there's any clear distinction, or is it really a case of what works in one place just isn't going to work somewhere else? Or that's
I think It's quite hard to say because it depends on what metrics that we were ranking on. If we're ranking on maybe inclusion of people and on availability of product, it would probably be one of the social club models. So the Spanish or even the New Malta model. If we're looking at it from kind of job creation and from economics, it would probably be the Netherlands, because the coffee shops are at least operating on a commercial sort of a scale. So I think it really depends on the policy outcomes, and I think it really depends on the country as well. Different countries have different priorities, but I think I personally really like the Spanish model. I know it's not commercial, but I think the fact that it is a closed clubs has sort of avoided quite a lot of the problems that I think Amsterdam and the Netherlands have had of tourists coming in, becoming over like prominent in the public eye. And I think the closed clubs, as we both experienced in Barcelona, I think were probably quite a bit, have been quite better at integrating that and still allowing people to have a choice of all sort of formats wider than I've seen anywhere else in Europe legally, for sure.
I mean, again, it's not the, Barcelona in particular, it's not the sort of place, I would have equated with, cannabis, 6 months ago and having a strong culture. And, but again, that just kind of shows, it's probably, again, just kind of the experience of having been to Amsterdam, having the experience of going to Barcelona and thinking, wow, it's regulated in such a different way. It feels like, it's not just kind of turn up and buy what's available. It's, there's a lot more kind of consideration, a lot more kind of ownership of products and of, consumption, through these social clubs. And I thought, actually it was a cool idea. And again, could it work here? I'd like to think it would here in the UK, but yeah,
for sure. I think there's no real right or wrong. I think you could see faults with the social club model, just as you could see faults with the homegrown model, or just as you could with the fully corporate model where we've all got branded products and huge branded stores. I think they've all got kind of merits and stuff, but I think some form of flexibility in whatever we have here in the UK or in Europe should be, in my eyes, would be the good thing. If we give the option for stores that we can go to, but then also allow people to grow their own or allow people to start their own clubs. I don't see that it should have to be like a one size fits all approach. Everyone has to get their stuff the same way, but not sure how that would play out in practice.
What do you think? Again, this is maybe a loaded question, but not being in the EU now, do you think the UK is in an advantageous, or we at a disadvantage when it comes to kind of following suit, or does it not really matter? I mean, that's again a more political question. I know nothing about politics.
Yeah, I think it's quite an interesting one. I think from what we've seen so far, it has had some sort of impacts. The UK's been able to take a different stance on, say, like the CBD and the FSA issue and the novel foods. We are seeing the UK start, well, particularly the Channel Islands, start to do more kind of licensing in Jersey and in Guernsey. So we are seeing some of this stuff, and we are seeing I think the independents probably will have some advantages, but I also feel like there may be some disadvantages if we do reach pan-European level kind of harmonization of anything, and that's at an EU level. Then will the UK then adopt the same cannabis standard as everyone else if that were to come? That's another question. I'm sure that we would work it out, but I wouldn't say if it was a net positive or negative. I think it's allowed us to be a bit more flexible, and I think it's also given us a bit of a reason to have change. I think a lot of the sort of issues of Brexit have been like, what are we going to do to get the money, and like people seeing it as a waste of time. But if it could be used to launch something like a big cannabis market that is really tax generative and is good for the economy, then could be something that the Conservatives would actually use as a kind of public support lever. So not totally out of the question, but
it's an interesting one. Again, I was having this discussion with a colleague of mine about, I think he put forward the idea that, it's the sort of thing perhaps the Conservatives could pull out in 5 to 10 years' time as a kind of election play. Oh, by the way, we're going to legalize cannabis if you keep us in. And again, as you were sort of saying, the tax benefit, remains to be seen, right? But it's an interesting assertion because there's so many other I guess, political, I don't want this to be a political discussion, but are more lenient, traditionally towards legalization of cannabis. But to think that they might have it as a kind of, ace up the sleeve or whatever, or, it's not out of the question, is it? And that's what kind of keeps it interesting, I think.
Exactly, yeah. And I think there was like a task force for innovation and growth that was launched after by George Freeman after Brexit, and he was quite keen. And one part of it, we helped coordinate a submission, and one of the submissions for new areas that they were looking at was the cannabis industry. So a lot of it was centered on hemp and CBD, but there was still quite a broad focus on cannabis, at least as part of the kind of new routes of growth and green recovery and stuff. So I was quite pleased that at least that conversation has been had, and at least they've got the support in Parliament that sets out these kind of recommendations. But yeah, in terms of like immediate progress, I wouldn't say the UK is going to be the first to go as much as maybe I would like it to personally.
Yeah. So cards on the table, just a prediction. What's the timeline for recreational cannabis here in the UK? And again, I know that's not a simple question, but if you had to call it, and I appreciate I'm putting you on the spot.
It's quite a tricky one. I would be quite bullish and say 5 to 7 years.
Okay.
But I think that a lot of people would also say that was conservative, because if we are seeing, say, Germany come in and another big market comes, if, say, Portugal also legalizes in the next few years, we also could see like a snap event where it just it happens and it's legalized. So I think as well as that, we also could see 10 years of no more progress and of the same thing. So I'd like to be kind of in the middle and say 5 to 7 years, but I would hope that it would be sooner. And I think that there are a lot of things that could accelerate it. Obviously, the public support is here. We are one of the highest out of the country's polls.
Really?
Cool. And also quite interestingly, a lot of the US brands that we speak to do say that the UK and London specifically have got quite high in their like social media hits and followers.
Okay.
So there's obviously a lot of support for these brands among the UK. So I think, those sort of things, and I think if federal legalization happens in the next few years, that could also be another big lever for the UK.
You think the US, if the US goes completely federal, then that'll catalyze us here in the UK to kind of take it seriously? I mean, or for government to take it seriously, maybe.
I think among the public, we're there. I think we've got the same levels of support as there were in the US and in Canada when they legalized. So the public support is there. I think the infrastructure and the operations can be there. We've already started with the medical infrastructure, and people are very interested in wanting to do this as a business and as to create money and to create jobs. So I think that appetite is there from the economic side. I think a lot of it is being scared, the politicians being scared to be the ones to do it. And I think the conflicting views and conflicting opinions on what market has been a success and which hasn't, all are making it quite hard for anyone to take like big steps at the minute.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think I always want to kind of go back to that kind of the Brexit bus, the kind of reclaim the 350 billion or whatever it is, and here's something that you could do that probably within 6 months or something like that. Simply flicking the legalization switch. And I know it's not that straightforward, but it's
But all society actually do that. Like, it's kind of what we need. I don't think that has been like a coordinated UK campaign for a long time. Like I was trying to do some research to see if there was, but not other than the petitions, which don't seem to do anything. The petitions online that get to 10,000 likes, or whatever, they can trigger some form of a debate, but I don't think that they don't really have the authority to do anything. But I think some sort of a organized campaign, like we've seen for maybe Extinction Rebellion or that sort of scale of thing, probably could change opinions. But I haven't seen that kind of start up yet.
And where does that support come from, or how does that get? I mean, again, I'm just asking you again because you're the oracle for all things cannabis.
The oracle of cannabis.
Absolutely. That's so you can own that term. You heard it here. Yeah. But where does that come from? I guess it just comes from public support generally and people coming together and having that discussion and saying, right, we're going to get behind this, we'll lend you our support, and there just being a coordinated approach.
I think so. And I think it's being, a lot of people just being opening up and having sort of conversations that may be difficult, speaking to people about using cannabis. And I think we see a lot of, I think everyone's kind of guilty of it, kind of self-censoring, like your own personal use or your use of your friend's use, or being associated. In some settings, people do have to censor these things. And I think that's probably a big part of making it a wider conversation, that bringing it outside of something that people are personally using or personally happy to talk about in a closed group, and maybe speaking about it online or speaking about it to a friend or family member or something. So I think it's going to be a slow thing, and the mix of a lot of conversations like that, as opposed to like one central group. But would love to see some sort of a coalition start up and some sort of a centralized campaign for legalization.
Yeah, it's certainly some food for thought, isn't it? So that's it. So if anyone's out there, give us a call.
Exactly. Lead the charge.
Absolutely. Cool. No, it's been great speaking to you. Thank you. Any other kind of final points from the report that you kind of want to raise that you think is particularly telling, or, something that made you think, if we continue along this path, things are going to sort of improve where recreational legalization is concerned? Any final sort of nuggets of wisdom from the Oracle?
Yeah, of course. I think what was quite interesting from my eyes was the amount of people who had considered trying legal cannabis that we polled. So I think it was around 30%, which doesn't sound like a huge amount, but a third of Europe wanting to consume legal cannabis, to me, is a huge thing when you compare it to the current average kind of use rates that are about 8% a year who report using. So that potential scale and that potential increase of what that many more people could be enjoying cannabis and appreciating it and using it to benefit them, that I think is really exciting. And I think that should be what we're kind of striving towards, and trying to open this up to as many people and for as many uses as possible. Because it's not always just like a social fun thing. It can be for so many things. So yeah, closing remarks would be to see the potential of the opportunity, the fact that so much of Europe is now in support, all of the kind of signs from the public are aligned, and it is really the political kind of impetus now that we are waiting for.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And the report, you can get it, is it the First Wednesday's website? Is it? That's where people can access it? It's completely free.
Yeah, the report is completely free to download. You can get a copy at First Wednesdays, and you can also become a member for free. So we do a monthly newsletter. We do meetups as and when we've got new topics and stuff to discuss. And we can also do kind of matchmaking support and stuff. So if anyone wants to have a chat, feel free to send an email, subscribe to First Wednesdays, download the report. And yeah, always around for a chat. So feel free to send me a message.
Thank you so much, Lily. And and happy 420 for yesterday, I think. So we're a day later, but it's still a thing. So cool.
It's still a national holiday.
Absolutely. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. And we will speak to you again, I'm sure. Thank you.
Thanks, Dave. Bye.
Bye.